I'd love to meet the lady that actually makes those electronic announcements of the fact that we're starting our webinar. But that aside, I'm Lee Gould. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Association of Government Finance Officers. We're thrilled to once again bring to you our weekly webinar series. This is part of our overall strategy to support members and our stakeholders through a very complicated environment that seems to be changing on a day-to-day basis. This week, we're joined by our friends from Questica, Brenda and James, continuing a discussion really around the use of systems and whatnot to help broaden and engage through the budget processing. Today, we're talking about utilizing software for remote data-driven decision-making. So I'm thrilled, again, to welcome Brenda and James. Some housekeeping matters. We have a questions tab that for most of you, I suspect, is on the right side of your screen. Feel free to ask questions and we'll sort of interject and lace our discussions to try to be as interactive as we can be throughout this process. You should have also received ahead of time the handouts. If you haven't, please email us right away and we'll make sure that we send those right out. So again, thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Brenda and James and get out of everyone's way. Talk to you in an hour.
Okay, wait, I think I should be talking, right? Am I sharing my screen?
Shows my that's your screen, Brenda.
You can see it? Everybody
Yes.
can see my screen? Okay, that's good. Yeah, really nice to meet everybody. My name is Brenda Morrison and I'm here with James Orr. I'm from Balancing Act. James is your local Canadian from Ontario, and we're really happy to be here with you today to discuss this new reality of here we are, 2 boxes in a Brady Bunch style, and we're just going to have a conversation. So as Lee said, feel free to interrupt. I realize, James and I know that you might be eating a sandwich, taking a coffee break, and actually probably working. Maybe while you're doing this webinar, we appreciate just tuning in. And if you do have questions, just let Lee know, and we're happy to, interrupt it and address it and have a conversation as best we can virtually. So thanks again. Just for it's going to move my head. Just for our agenda quickly today, just going to tell us a little bit about who we are. We're going to talk a little bit about the challenges and solutions. I think you know the challenges all too well. James is going to delve into how to use software, go in depth on the Questica Open Book software and how to implement that with decision making. I'm going to talk a little bit about the softer side, about data transparency and citizen engagement. We're going to give you a few examples and just wrap it up from there. So we'll hopefully be done in an hour, but we definitely have time to talk if you'd like to go further, or you can always talk, tag us offline. So before we just get started a little more, I do want to just have James introduce himself a little bit to you.
Sure, I'm James Orr. I'm the product manager for Questica Budget and Open Book, and I've been working on budgeting and planning software for about 15 years.
And that's me. I am the co-founder of Balancing Act. We're a software company located here in Denver, Colorado, a little further south to you. I come from the policy, to be honest, in the political world before I entered the software world. And we can talk a little bit more about that. But again, just happy, we're both happy to be here with you today. This is the company's. James, you want to offer anything more about Questica?
Sure. So Questica is a company that builds budgeting, planning, and transparency software for the public sector, especially for municipalities, but we also work with other public sector organizations. And we've been in business since 1998, making web-based and now cloud-based budgeting and planning software.
And again, Engage Public, that is our, my partner and I started Engage Public, gosh, to be honest, back in the first recession, as we've been in business for a while, is we did a lot of face-to-face consulting and public facilitation around a lot of tough issues, healthcare, school finance, and others. But we began to do a lot during the recession on budgets, and we realized that there was just a gap between the public and elected officials and staff when it came to the budget. So we started Balancing Act about 2014 and 2015, and here we are. So we'll talk a little bit more about us later on. Here we are. Exactly. There's, James and I have our individual square. And I think all of you right now have your squares. And here's the current challenges. We know there's revenue shortages all the way around, and that folks are redoing their 2020 budgets and their FY 2021 budgets right now. In fact, we just got, I think James has got a question about that. How many of you are in the midst of redoing your 2020 forecasts? You're working together in an entirely different way. I mean, government was one of those institutions, at least here in the States, and I suspect in Canada too, that you went to the office. It was one of those places there people weren't working remotely, and now you are. And working remotely just changes everything for all of us in the private sector and for the public sector, and how you're relating to different audiences. It's just different when we're in a square box looking at our computer camera. And just, I think one of the biggest thing right now is just that residents are really tuned into government right now, and the expectations of government are higher, and therefore requiring just more transparency and engagement. I certainly think that more people were watching the news during the COVID-19 than ever before, because local news especially. And so this is a challenge. It's Balancing Act. It's a simulation. I'll be sharing this with you a little bit more. But when we first started, asking local governments about it during 2014, during 2015, especially here in our hometown here in Denver, residents weren't really paying much attention to municipal budgets, to be honest, because things were looking very good here in the States and in Canada. Coffers were flush. And when we asked about whether there needed to be resident participation and transparency in the budget, they might have said, you know what, we put our budget book on the web. We have our CAFR up there. It's a 900,000, 2,000 page PDF. And, if somebody wants to look at it, it's there. But the residents weren't clamoring for more information. And that was true in many circumstances, that they weren't clamoring. But now, I think during the recession, that's changed. So I think with declining revenue, it's just even more important that there's transparency. So not only is it important that your budget information is easily accessible, but that it's not necessarily in a 900-page budget document. That it's in a format that's easy for a resident to understand, and that input into these decisions that are going to be made is critical, and that it's not just the information going out one way, but there's a conversation that is going to need to be had about what government looks like given declining revenue. And if governments do that, if local governments do that, and this is, there has been good data shown that backs this up, there will be a shared responsibility and trust, that it's not just those bureaucrats in City Hall that are making the cuts or the elected officials, that we did it together. And this is how we're choosing to govern and during this pandemic. I think this is an interesting slide. I don't know if some of you may have heard of the Edelman Trust Barometer, and they do it all over the world. And this is something all of you know, so it's it's not huge news to anybody, and it's very intuitive. But you'll see that people that are more informed have a higher trust in institutions, and that the Edelman Trust is is an aggregate of government and media and business. But if people are informed, they trust. So if they're watching the news or reading the paper, they're tuned, then they trust. The less informed, they don't trust. They have less trust. So this is just an interesting thing. If you want to just look at the Edelman Trust barometer, it's a good, easy. It's an easy take a look at it. Just Google Edelman Trust Barometer Canada, and you'll see it. What I think the Canadians do particularly well, and some of you may have seen this, and you're rolling your eyes like, I've seen this 100 times, but some of you may not, because a lot of you, this sometimes is in the communications departments or the planning departments of your cities. But Canada is well known for its, I think, robust public participation, and I think you're actually way further advanced than those of us in the States. But the IAP2 spectrum, International Association of Public Participation spectrum, gives you an idea about how to get folks involved in this budget making. I mean, you might have said to yourself, residents are interested in the location of a new library or new roads, but that when it comes to budget issues, the public is not clamoring always to go to a budget hearing, and now we don't have those anymore. So that's true, but it doesn't mean that these guidelines shouldn't apply to the budget, especially now as it looks like there's going to be some changes in our services. And therefore some outcomes. So I'd encourage you to take a look at the IAP2 spectrum. This is an international spectrum. It's the same for Canada. It's the same for the US. And most people do follow this. But you can see that there's 5 different buckets. And most of the time when it comes to the budget, what we're going to be talking about today is we're going to be talking about informing, consulting, and involving. And what James is going to show you is a very, very good tool to inform the budget, to inform the public about the budget. And I'm going to be talking to you about how you consult and involve the public in the budget processes. And of course, during this time, I mean, you're informing, cities are informing via email or Facebook. You might be doing some surveys to find out how people are reacting to the COVID-19. But I would encourage you to take a look at this spectrum as you're considering different ways to involve the public and refer back to it. As I said, it's well known in Canadian dialogue circles. But you might be wondering, you're thinking, well, the budgets. Who looks at them? The way you might look at a budget, and I notice that many of you are finance professionals, budget professionals. You like spreadsheets. You understand spreadsheets. They're intuitive to you. For some of us, they're not. So as you're beginning to think about communicating this new reality, this new fiscal reality to the public, you have to think about different ways to do it and who your audience is. So when you're doing it internally, because I think of some of you, and I think James is going to show you a little bit. I mean, some of you are, it's furloughs, it's budget cuts, it's departmental budget cuts. It's down and dirty, right? You don't need a big storytelling. You don't need to. They want in-depth information. They can read a spreadsheet. The data must be clear. Elected officials, though, they're the ones who are on the hook. Residents are, if you run into an elected official in the grocery store, they have a Zoom town hall meeting, they need to present the cuts in a very different way. They need to present it maybe for a more human side. They need to present a story. The narrative is important. They need to be ready to answer questions. Maybe they ran on a certain platform of better transportation or more cultural services. So they need different kinds of data, and they need it presented in a very accessible way, not only for themselves, but for the public. And that all elected officials, and I think we all know this, some of them come into their jobs with very, very different skill sets. Some are very, very adept at reading a spreadsheet. Some, they don't come from that background, and they need the data presented in a much more accessible way. And residents, of course, they too need, most of them come to look at a budget because they are concerned about a topic. Maybe they're concerned that the pool is going to be closed, or there's going to be no recreational things, and they want to know how the budget cuts are going to be cutting that. Or maybe it's a transportation because routes are being cut. So as you were thinking about software and simulations and visualizations, they do have to accommodate diverse audiences. I just thought this was fun. In that this is Denver's general fund budget, and on the left is a page from their budget book, and on the right is our software. And as you can see, when we're looking at a budget summary, for some of you for most of you on the left, you're like, oh, that's how we do ours, or that's interesting. If I look at it, I have to spend some time deciphering that a little bit and think, oh, and instead, I could easily access a simulation or a visualization that does not, it's much less of a commitment for me as a resident. So I'm going to turn this over to James right now.
Thanks, Brenda. Let's see if I can share my screen here. All right, Brenda, do you see the same slide that you were just showing?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Right, so we're working in a realm of remote work now, and we've been talking so far about transparency and communication, but a big part of data-driven budgeting and decision-making also has to do with communication and collaboration. So it's as much to do with communicating with council and the public as it is to do with communicating people inside the organization in order to work together. We're talking about the development of budgets and the making of large financial decisions. And a budget is a massive, complex document. And it takes a lot of people working on it to bring it all together. It's full of details. And, I think modern cloud-based software is the way that an organization can really get their arms around this beast. And, working with emails and spreadsheets and file shares can take you so far, but it really helps to have software that is built for collaboration. The way that we accomplish this in Questica, although there are plenty of packages that work in a similar way, is to bring in the concept of workflow. So, let's take this giant task of building this budget. We're going to break it down into 100 or 1,000 different pieces, and we're going to distribute this work down to different individuals who can complete their piece and move it up along the workflow, where it can eventually be reviewed and approved, and then collectively through this controlled system, we've created a very complex document together, and we've been able to tame that chaos by working inside that system. Now, when developing this kind of information, it's true, and Brenda, I think you covered this already, we need to present for different audiences, right? So the people who are working, for example, inside our budgeting software, they want to see detailed numbers. Agency users who are working on a smaller piece of the budget really just need to see their local corner of the budget. Whereas, once you're getting out to council and the public, they don't want to see a big wall of numbers. They want to see visualized information. They want to see narratives and storytelling to explain what the heck it is that's going on. So the ability to communicate this information to people who aren't subject matter experts in finance. So I'm going to show some examples of how you can use our software to accomplish this kind of thing, taking you from the sort of micro level of how we might make a budget change happen, and then bringing that out to council and possibly communicating to the public. Brenda, can you still see my screen? Ooh, Brenda, are you still with us? Am I still with us?
I muted myself.
Oh, great. Okay, I wasn't sure if I'd gone offline or something. All right, so in this example, we've got an administrator logging into Questica Budget, and it's 2020. We've got a major projected revenue shortfall happening for the city, this city of Sunnyvale, British Columbia, and we need to come up with cost reductions that can address this revenue shortfall for the year.
Sorry, can I interrupt just for 1 second, James? I apologize, but are we supposed to be looking at slides right now? I think we might have got turned around launching that poll.
I think.
Oh, I see.
I'm looking at.
It looks like I'm showing my screen. You should see the login page of the Questica budget software right now.
Oh, I apologize.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on the right thing. Oh, good. All right.
Sorry,
so,
James, didn't mean to scare you.
No problem. Thanks, Ann. Right, so as an administrator, I've logged into this software, and we need to take a look at this big budget using a level of detail and visualization that can allow us to get our arms around it. So for example, one way to look at that is to see a big expenses breakdown by my organizational structure. So in this case, I've sort of broken down the entire budget into a big sunburst. And you know, when we're looking at these city expenses, I mean, it's obvious that some of these services are pretty essential. We're not going to have a lot of flex when it comes to dealing with fire and police protective services. But some of our other big items that we can probably find efficiencies in will include Parks and Recreation, Engineering and Public Works. You know, Parks and Rec possibly would have some natural efficiencies because we're canceling programs, right? The summer camps are off. Parks have been closed for a certain period of time. We may be able to find these kinds of things. So this is where a finance administrator could take a large section of the budget, which has been broken down into smaller pieces called costing centers, and we can push those out to our agency users, request that they develop alternate budget scenarios for their pieces of the budget that implement a certain level of reduction, for them to prepare those scenarios, submit them back, so that we can review those and see if we've been able to hit our new targets based on this new revenue reality. So now I'll log in as an agency user. Kate Black is in Parks and Recreation, and Kate has been asked to work up some reductions to meet a certain threshold. So this is the sort of dashboard that Kate would be looking at during normal budget development, including a list of her costing centers. But now she's being asked to go in and develop these specific reductions. So she might open up something like, well, let's see here, we have this turf management. This is one of the bigger items inside this department, you know, having nearly $2 million and 100% in salaries, right? This is all seasonal labor. So in this case, Kate was able to develop an alternative scenario where we have a list of positions that have been allocated to this costing center to generate this $2 million budget. And by working on this particular costing center to come up with a set of reductions of about 35% of the working hours between May and the end of the year. And so in this scenario, she was able to see a reduction of, looks like around 20%, but we can actually do a comparison of that. And now we're getting into the kind of analytics that are in the micro, right? This is what an agency user working in a finance capacity might want to see, which is, you know, just show me the wall of numbers. And, you know, what kind of reduction have I got from between my submission and my 2020 reductions? And it looks like, right, just over 20% has been saved on this individual costing center. Well, great. So Kate can complete this work and resubmit these budgets with the new reductions put in. And now it's moving up to higher levels of review and approval till eventually we're back up at the finance level, having, you know, distributed all this busy work out to a large number of people, but in a way that is safe and doesn't require a massive amount of, say, spreadsheet consolidation or emails or templates or any of that ugly stuff. Right, so I will log back in as an administrator. And now we can imagine that this reforecasting exercise is complete and that these new agency budgets have been submitted. As an administrator who can see the whole budget and as I said, sort of get your arms around it, I can take a look at our reductions for the year. So in this case, I'm looking at a roll up by my accounts, including all of the costing centers in the budget. And we can see that we have managed to hit our goal and reduce this budget from around 225 million, cut about $16.5 million across all the agencies down to 208 for the year, to meet this revenue shortfall. And by having all the data together on one screen, the ability to sort of slice and dice this data to see where the biggest line item reductions are, to be able to push this data out to a spreadsheet for whatever other type of analytics I might want to be doing. But again, this is the kind of information, the kind of wall of numbers that is great for finance folks because it's got exactly what you want. But now we need to communicate this information, right? This is now going to go potentially to council, who's going to take a look at our reductions and see if they make any sense. So in this case, with our particular software, we push this data out to our data visualization platform, which is called Questica OpenBook. So in this case, I was able to take these cost reductions and push them into what we call a budget explorer. So the city of Sunnyvale, a fictional city, has a Sunnyvale OpenBook site. And here they've created a few different public visualizations, but this is internal, which means it's not open to the public. This is just for those people who can log in. And this could be what they might use at a council presentation or to actually create logins and passwords for council so that they can come in and check this stuff out. So in this case, I've taken these 2020 reductions. This says 2021 only because my demo database is off by a year. And now we're comparing the sort of before and after of the budget with the reduction. So again, here are those same numbers. Our adopted was 225.1, but with the staff reductions down to 208. And we can see which departments were the biggest hits. Quite a bit came off engineering and public works, and we can click to drill down into this information. So we've gone from a big wall of numbers to a very user-friendly sort of environment where users can figure out that if they click on something, it takes you down to the next level. And so public works, and then you see, okay, well, it looks like, there were no changes in fleet operations, but some of this construction activity has come way down. And we have the ability to just see the raw numbers too. Right, so this is something that can be helpful for example, a council presentation, but also might eventually be presented to the public and to the citizens. Now, this is a user-friendly presentation of data, but not necessarily something that tells you a story. It's more of a doorway into a complex data set, giving you a friendly way to explore it. Platforms like these allow you to embed these visualizations so that I could actually use this data visualization as a component of a larger article that is placed on the city website. I might have different paragraphs describing how the city's arrived at these changes and what the impacts are going to be on our workforce. And I could maybe show a few different budget explorer type visualizations like this one in different rectangles around the article, maybe by different departments, or maybe explaining what the impact is going to be for city services and service levels. All right, Brenda, that is everything for my side of the presentation, so I'm going to pass it back over to you.
Oh, I see me. I don't see my presentation. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go back to it.
I'll just say,
I've made you a presenter, Brenda. You should be able to share your screen now.
Okay. Yes.
and just so you know, we haven't received any questions yet, but we're happy to take them just using the functionality on the screen.
Well, thanks everybody, and yeah, and I encourage all of you. I did ask that was probably me that screwed things up for a little bit. We did ask a question of how many of you are using some kind of budget visualization software, and it said that most of you, over 50% of you, are using some kind of budget visualization software. So maybe some of you are using, as I said, there's several products out on the market. Some of you may be adapted Tableau or Power BI, or I think even you can do some cool stuff in Excel right now. So, but again, it's so important during this time to perhaps put a little more emphasis on this than you might have maybe a year ago. And just so all of you know, because many of you are finance professionals, GFOA, the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, has been, even prior to this downturn, has been placing a lot of influence on this data transparency and citizen engagement, basically saying, starting in 2018, what happens if the ride is over? This good economic wave we've been riding, I don't think anyone thought it would be a cliff, but basically saying, be prepared. And so last December, after I think they had a task force of quite a long time, they did release some recommendations. And what they did release, and of course we here in Denver couldn't have been happier at Balancing Act, is that they basically said that you ought to use some form of simulation, that people really do need to kind of feel both sides of the budget, that a survey, as good as they are, a survey is kind of one way, and it doesn't paint the full picture of the budget process. So that's basically saying, you know what, you ought to use simulations. You need two-way communication. You ought to do it in person and online, except now we're just online. And that there needs to be some detail. These simulations need to be robust yet simple, robust yet flexible. And as I said, we feel that we have, and I'm going to show you a little bit about our simulation. We feel that we've done that here at Balancing Act. But the simulations, they say, and for citizen engagement, it ought to be the simulations frame trade-offs. And the thing that what you guys do all the time, which residents don't, which is, you know, that if you increase money here, something takes a hit on the other side. And that it can't just be, you all know that better than we do. And that the public has to understand there's a cost, there's services. You know, when James just showed a decrease in I think it was police, is that one person's job? Is it 10 people's job? What's the give? Is there going to be less 911 office? What happens? We need to be educated on what government does, to be honest, because to many of us, it's just like a big vending machine. You put money in and you press a button and, you know, a candy bar comes out. But in between then, there's a process. And we need to know not exactly what happens in the process, but we do need to know, have a better idea of what government does. Simulations do align citizens with what they're willing to pay. Because if I say, gosh, I do want my library opened, even during the COVID-19, it's even more important that people have access to books and other things. But am I willing to pay for it? And what's going to happen? So GFOA did say that these were important. You can see that this was as early as February 2018. Came out with this transparency and citizen engagement recommendations.
Hi, Brenda. I hesitate to interrupt again, but there's no slides showing. Should you be sharing your screen?
Oh, yes. How about
Okay.
that? Does that work?
That's perfect.
Okay. So don't worry, because you did, I don't think you missed any important slides. That was the slide. So one of the things about budget simulations that's important is that we think is more important than perhaps doing than a survey. And while surveys can give you some information, what's great about a budget simulation is it provides what we call the 3 C's. And one is constraints, in that a simulation that shows both the revenue and the expenditure side shows that I just can't say, yeah, I think they're all important. It shows the constraints. Everybody has to have a balanced budget. I can't spend more than what comes in. There are legal requirements, and there's restricted funds. A few years ago, I was before I became a software person, I was facilitating a big session for a new governor of our state. And like all governors, they want to, they have their priorities, and they do a big listening tour. And he was doing a big listening tour. And I went, to be honest, back to my hometown. There was maybe 150 people, opinion leaders in the room. And they had these very fancy budget briefing books that the governor's office had put together of all his different priorities. And, they just varied all the good ideas, full day kindergarten, preschool, childcare, healthy lunches, you name it, it was on there. And we wanted them to vote on it. And they were using clickers at that time, for PowerPoint. And somebody said to me as I was facilitating this topic, and I was doing kind of what the governor asked, but she said to me, Brenda, this is all great. I vote yes on all of these, but if I don't know what's not going to be funded, how am I being responsible making this decision? And she was right, because there was no mechanism for saying, if I choose all these expenditures, what's it going to cost or what's not going to be funded? And so that's why constraints are important. Context. If we don't know, what does it mean if we cut something or we add revenue? Really, what does it mean? Has it recently been increased? Did we recently add 5 more people? Or what does that mean? The context has to be there, and of course, consequences. So people have to understand, if we add something, what does it mean? Are we preparing? Should we, what is a tax increase? What about vulnerable populations? Should we defer maintenance, even though it's tempting? Often they suggest that you don't do that. So this is what a budget simulation can do, as opposed to just kind of a plain Survey Monkey survey. So this is, I'm going to do I'm going to just take you a quick spin around a site that is using both Questica and a balancing act simulation. So this is Largo, Florida. James, do you have this queued up on your screen, or should I queue it up on mine?
I do. I can bring it up.
Okay.
One sec.
So this is the realities of the remote teamwork.
All right. How does that look, Brenda?
That looks good. So, so you'll see at the top, and James, I'm going to ask you to kind of, if you would just do this. At the top, you'll see, this is Largo, Florida. This is actually a live plan. You'll see that there's always a balance bar, because we always just have to have, people, local governments need to be balanced. Many of our local governments right now don't show a red, aren't balanced. They're showing a deficit currently. But in this, I specifically wanted to show you this one, because this is a capital improvement plan, and this is integration that Largo has with Questica. They're a Questica customer, and they're a balancing customer, and we thought it'd be fun to show you a little bit about what they're doing. So they have, as you could see, some capital projects. This was done, to be honest, like probably at the end of February, and things may have changed, but they have some monies. And if you just, James, pick a category there.
Sure.
So as you can see, under facilities, they've got that icon up to the top. If you just go to the right of that facilities, or on any of them. And as you can see, it tells a little bit about, it's going to tell a little bit about what it is. So yeah, so they're talking about their Performing Arts Center. If I wanted to know about the Performing Arts Centers, they integrate really nicely with OpenBook. Obviously not all of our customers integrate with OpenBook, and they might just put a blurb about what it is. But in this case, I can really get, as a resident, a lot of information about the Central Park Performing Arts Center maintenance. I could see if it was funded, I could see where it was in the queue. Yeah, if you could close that out. But I could also choose to unfund something. And as you can see, if I unfund something, it's saving me $650,000. So let's say that Largo is looking to cut, you know, some capital projects. The way they've structured this, and this can be structured in many different ways. This is pretty lengthy. You know, and there'd be other ways to do it. You could use a yes/no question. You could use a simple plus minus. There's other ways to do it. But if I pressed unfund, because let's say I need to, I've been told I need to cut a couple $1 million, James can just go through and start unfunding. And as you can see, I'm unfunding as I go. And so suddenly I have an $8 million, you know, I've saved $8 million. But as I'm saving it, money, it's also telling me, you know, maybe do I want to unfund the fire station? What would I like to do? Or I can maintain the status quo. So these are through, you can see there's unfunded facilities projects there as well. And you can do this through, right, if I fund certain things, you can see I'm already in the red, it changes. And of course, you can do this for a general fund budget as well. We have school districts right now that are 11 to 15, $20 million in the red because our state funding is tanking and they're deciding whether they have to furlough teachers or cut sports and how much money they can squeeze out. So as I said, this fits the criteria for what GFOA. It's got context, which is you can put an info icon and information. It's got the constraints. And if you just want to go to the revenue side, this is a little different. Yeah, most of the time you'll just see, so this is their revenue. And you can just see on the other side, they have, they're giving, you know, people an opportunity to see what it's like if they raise their property taxes or cut them. I suspect there's not a lot of appetite for raising taxes, but if I did want to raise a tax or a fee, maybe I don't want to see any of those those projects not funded. Therefore, I would have to look over on this side and decide maybe I'm willing to pay a little bit more in a sewer fee. Maybe I'm, I'm $5 million. So over here, but they're based, property tax. Yeah, let's raise my sewer fee there, James. But if you see, if I raise my sewer fee, it's going to take quite a bit. It's not, those fees aren't substantial. So it tells me a little bit about this. About wastewater funds, but you'll probably see that you'll notice that they locked off some big funds. They don't want to do some gas tax. Sometimes they'll lock off property taxes or sales tax because they're not going there. We've had cities lock off the entire fund. You'll see that little padlock next to West Bay Drive. You can padlock anything, a debt, a fund balance. In this case, it's county gas tax. Maybe that's just there are taxes that are beyond the control. They're set by the state. So you can do any of these kinds of things. But as you can see, it's you've got to make choices. James is putting in a comment. Thank you, James. You could also share on Facebook or Twitter, and you do have robust analytics as well that you can see dive way into where people are clicking and what they're most interested in. So that's, do you want to talk a little bit about the integration with OpenBook there, James?
Sure. So when we're working with Balancing Act, you'll notice that there's this connection through where we can get information about these projects in detail. What was that really big one? Oh, the fire station, right. So when I click on more information, Balancing Act offers its users the ability to put anything into this more information, including a link to another website, which is what they've done here. So the City of Largo has connected Balancing Act through to Questica OpenBook. And what we're actually looking at here is part of a tool in OpenBook. So let's look at that more directly. So here's the City of Largo's Questica OpenBook site. And the pages that we've been seeing embedded inside the Balancing Act simulation are taken from this Largo CIP visualization. So again, OpenBook, more of a data visualization and exploration tool, not a simulation and engagement tool, but because it's a very open tool, they work nicely together. So in this case, this is for citizens to come and explore the city's CIP plan. It's, takes a map-centric view. Our users, when we observe them, they tend to open it right up and zoom into their own neighborhood first. And by sending all of this information from our Questica budget product, if you've prepared your capital budget correctly, creating something like this can actually be a push-button operation, whereas developing something like this from scratch with all these different kinds of information would be a pretty big job otherwise. So we have the ability to place the project on a map, and not just with points, but also with geometry like lines or polygons. We have a variety of different long and short text fields. We have the ability for your projects to have images, big numbers about the costs. We have the detailed breakdown of expenses and funding. This can also have links to related projects or downloadable files. And it can also illustrate the operating budget impact for those projects that do impact the operating budget. And that's often a controversial subject for citizens. So I'm proud of Largo this year. I think they did a great job on their capital visualization. Some of our customers have really put a lot of work into these, and the care really shows, I think.
Yeah, Largo did do a great job, and I think as many of you now are looking at your capital budgets and having to prioritize what projects are going to be funded this year and what's going to be put on hold for further years. And while there may be some projects that you will choose not to, possibly ask residents, but council folks, this is important for them because some of these are in their districts and could be a very, very good tool for council. As I said yesterday in Denver, I noticed that our mayor put a project on hold, and there was all sorts of, and it's not that it's bad, it's, because it's sales tax driven and lobbying tax driven, and there probably isn't going to be any money for it, but there was all sorts of pushback on why it was that and not something else. And as I said, he was just kind of looking at the numbers. But I think if there had been a very easy way for him to demonstrate this, versus some others, people would have come to probably the same place he did, just based on common sense. But it would have been a really beneficial way to communicate that decision. All right, so I think we're at a good time. 13 minutes till, I think we're just wrapping up right now. James, you want to just recap?
Sure. So what I hope we've managed to communicate this year is that, we've got a big communication challenge when it comes to financial data. It's great to have it detailed and complex for finance folks. We need to transform that information to inform non-technical people, non-financial folks, council, members of the public, and that we have a lot of different tools at our disposal now to make that possible, probably better than ever before. Also that collaboration through cloud-based software is, also better than it's ever been before. So having lots of people work together on a massive complex project like building a budget, it's really possible to take some of the workload off of the budget office or the finance group who've had to do so much clerical work and processing, and actually use technology to be able to spread that work around the organization, have the agencies preparing budget submissions that naturally flow upward through a workflow system, giving you a higher quality budget and a more accurate document. This is certainly a time where transparency is important. You know, where we've got big budget decisions and painful budget decisions going through in public, in government right now, and informing the public is probably more important in a time like this than under normal circumstances.
I'll just take a minute to remind everyone that if you want to submit a question, you can do so under the questions tab in your control panel. So I don't see any right now.
Sure. Data provides the foundation for a compelling narrative. So the numbers themselves can tell a story, but it's better if you can control that narrative and actually tell that story. So Brenda, for your example, where the mayor wasn't able to explain the process by which they arrived at those selections, you know, if the story had come along with it, well, you know, we looked at these projects, we looked at those ones, and this was the natural fit because of this. And here are the charts, and here are the numbers that sort of back these decisions up. You know, now you're constructing a narrative that people can make sense of.
Right.
And yeah, it's a cliche, but it's really true that a picture paints 1,000 words. Data visualization as a technology has come along so far in the last 10 years, and it has an incredible amount of value for communicating complex information to citizens and the public.
So I do have a question now from Eric. Part of the complexity of showing budget data to all users is informing them the complexity of funding situations. How would similar engagement software show this in an easily visible process? Lack of punctuation, so I hope I read that correctly.
Sure, well, I think I understand it. I mean, I know that certainly, especially when we're dealing with capital budgeting, you'll often have, I remember when we were first designing our software, we thought, oh, okay, well, we'll just give the user a scoring system so that they can, you know, rank their projects as one big master list, and then they tell us how much money they got, and then we'll put them in order and we'll draw a line where the money runs out. But it ended up being so much more complex than that. You know, we have all sorts of earmarked funding sources that can only be used for very specific things, and so it's not just as easy as canceling this particular thing and putting it over there instead, or, you know, drawing $1 million out of a water reserve and putting it towards a construction project. But, you know, it's an excellent idea. You know, in our open book product, we do have the ability to show funding sources, and we often see our customers illustrating the different funds and reserves that their dollars are coming from to pay for these things. But I don't know if that really drives across that idea of, you know, if you've got the angry citizen looking at a project that they wish wasn't happening, are they going to notice in the funding sources that millions of dollars is coming from a specialized transfer from the province that is you know, specifically for, you know, hospitals or who knows what it is you're working on. Maybe we could find ways to be more clear about that, because I agree that's probably something that is tougher to communicate to citizens.
We actually, great question. We actually have that in that feature built in. We built it in because of just because you guys are good budget nerds, I'll tell you. Normally, I would skip this part. Is that you know, gas tax only funds transportation here, right? And doesn't fund anything else. It doesn't fund general fund stuff. So, but people are furious about lack of transportation projects, right? And they'll think, where's the transportation money? Where's the transportation money? But if we do the general fund, we model the general fund here in Colorado, you don't put the gas tax in, right? So, so what we have done is, or there's a specific transfer from it into the general fund, which means it can only be used for highway and not for anything else. So we do have something called a dedicated fund, which just in our simulation, just connects one revenue expenditure to one revenue to something on the revenue to one expenditure, period. And it's it takes probably one more step than when you're building our simulation. Our simulation is easily built, to be honest. It can be easily done through Questica, or it's easily built through Excel, to be honest, because we found that many of our everybody still uses a CSV spreadsheet in some capacity. But we do have that dedicated fund if you want to show that and want to make that clear. We also have, to be honest, like Kansas City, they've rolled up 35 different funds into their demo, into their simulation, and no one's probably ever asked that they've rolled up 35 different funds, so that because that would drive everybody crazy if they had to look through the fund. But if there is something specific, we can definitely accommodate that because it's so common. Good question, though.
Yeah, I hope that answers it.
Yep, so I've got another one here. You guys did so well on that one. Just got to try and make my screen bigger here. In your example, while the person worked on Parks and Rec changes, could others at the same level, say in police services, see the changes made in Parks and Rec, or only people at a higher level in the budgeting hierarchy?
Good question.
Right, good question. I'm sorry, who was asking that one, Ann?
Marty.
Marty. It's a great question, and Marty, I'd be curious to hear why you're asking that and which you would prefer. In our particular software, it can be configured either way, and typically we would have those lower level agency users only able to see their own data, their own local data, so that a police services agency level user would not see the Parks and Rec budget or any changes that are being developed and haven't been approved yet. It's only the higher level users that can sort of get the broader view of all the data in the system. But I wonder,
James, you can unmute Marty if you want to engage in a discussion.
Sure, please.
We'll try it. We'll see how this works.
Okay, what happens?
So Marty has been unmuted, and if he's there, he can feel free to speak.
Sorry, I don't have a mic.
Oh, I hear you though.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Sorry, I sent another one that said, yeah, that was actually the answer I was looking for. In the budgeting processes, people might be looking to see what others do first to achieve the new lower budget levels and waiting and seeing, so to speak. And then by blocking that out, it would make them work on their own area more vigorously than hoping somebody else can cover the shortfall.
Right. I can see how asking people to go implement reductions could create weird perverse incentives, like waiting to see if your cut gets covered by somebody else, or trading credits with other agencies. You know, if they cut another 5%, then maybe you could do them some other kind of favor. But yes, no, using our particular software, and I think this is fairly common, that information can be as private as you'd like it to be.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Thanks, Marty. I'm going to mute him again now. I don't see any other questions. Any final wrap-up that you want to offer, or should we just say, oh, there's Lee. I'll turn it over to Lee.
So thank you. Just thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, and stay well, stay healthy, and good luck to you. We're thinking about you. Thanks for your service.
Yeah, thanks very much, everyone. We had fun presenting for you today, and thanks for your interest.
Well, Brenda and James, we can't thank you enough. Again, the ability to create and share proposal budgets using interactive tools like the ones you've shown today, be it charts, tablets, dashboards, or any other cloud-based simulations, is certainly a bonus to anyone's process. And just discussing the topic these days is entirely topical. As you point out, we're in a strange time. So we can't thank you enough. Again, our thanks to Questica as a partner for CAGFO, and for folks that are looking for copies of this webinar, you can find it later this week posted on our website at cagfo.ca. Again, thank you, everyone. Stay safe and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks all.
Thank you.